The following message is from a senior Canadian statesman and is a warning to the American people and others that their lives and liberty could be in imminent danger.
Hello, my friends and cousins in the United States of America and Canada and elsewhere around the world. My name is Paul Hellyer, and I'm a former Minister of National Defense for Canada. And I have made many YouTubes in the last 10 years or so, but this one is different. I would say that it's more important by a scale of maybe 100 to 1 or 1,000 to 1 to any of the others, simply because of the number of lives involved. I had someone at the top ask me if I would write a book and expose the lies that our governments have been telling us for the last 70 years or so. And even though I'm 97 years old, I said, yes, I will be happy to do that, because I think it's very, very important that people everywhere, and especially in the United States, know what's going on and have a chance to react to it. So this is, the name of the book, incidentally, is Liberated, the Economics of Hope. But it's a very broad-ranging book and covers all of the major policy problems that we face in the world today, including, of course, that of money. And I'm not going to try and go into detail about each of those problems, because it would be far too overwhelming. Those of you, of course, who have followed my work would probably understand most or all, perhaps not all. But those who are in the dark, which is, I'm afraid to say, the majority of people everywhere, it would be too much for you to handle. So today I'm just going to talk about 3 of the policy issues. And then when you get a copy of the book, you can bite off a little bit and chew it until you get used to it, and then carry on from there. And you will be able to absorb the scope of what I call the broader reality as you go along. Now, the first item that I want to mention is the fact that we Earthlings are not alone. I think you can appreciate that with millions of stars and with many of them having planets like ours, that there are other sentient species in addition to those of us here on Earth. But we have to come to grips with the fact that there has been a lot of visiting to Earth, and that there are some species who have actually been living here amongst us. I only went public on this score 15 years ago.
UFOs are as real as the airplanes that fly over your head. That is my unequivocal conclusion.
I had been Minister of National Defense, as I mentioned, and I'd seen sightings reports which indicated that there were maybe 15 or 20% that were unaccounted for, so that you could say they were unidentified flying objects. But I was too busy at the time bringing together the Army, Navy, and Air Force into a single defense force to ask a lot of questions and to investigate the subject in depth. During the last 15 years, however, I have made it a preoccupation, and the amount that I've learned is just, in my opinion, astronomical. And I probably include in the book something like 25 or 30% or 35% of what I have learned. But today, it probably only subject you to maybe 1%. I had never seen a UFO when I went public in September 2015, but I read a book which convinced me the day after Roswell, and also I chatted with a retired United States Air Force general who confirmed that there had been a crash at Roswell in 1947, and that at first it had been reported as a crash by the base commander, but then later that day it was reported to be something else. His boss, Brigadier General Ramsey, had a press conference and produced a Raman balloon used for meteorological purposes, and said this is what was discovered. Now, the first release was the truth. The second was an absolute lie, and it was the foundational lie for a continuation of lies, disinformation, and misinformation that has been going on for the 70 years since. So, I have now seen individual UFOs myself on 2 occasions, and an armada of about a dozen on one other occasion. And I have in my more than 12,500 emails in my inbox at least 1,000 and maybe more from people who have had experience either in seeing them or meeting extraterrestrials or being abducted by them or having some other contact with them. So there is absolutely no question about either their existence or the fact that they have visited us for a long time. As a matter of fact, I remember in the 1960s, there was an armada of flying saucers that flew south across Central Europe, and the commander-in-chief of the Allied Armed Forces there, General Lemnitzer, who is a friend of mine, was just about to press the panic button when they turned around and flew north, and he realized that they were not Russian or Soviet at the time. And he ordered a study that took 3 years and which showed beyond any doubt whatsoever that there were at least 4 species that had been visiting planet Earth for thousands and thousands of years. One of the advantages when I went public was to meet a lot of interesting people, and one of those was Edgar Mitchell, an Apollo astronaut. And we were having dinner here in Toronto one night, and the subject came up of the Roswell crash. And he said, well, how many species do you think that there are? And I said, somewhere between 2 and 12. And he said, well, that's what I think too. Well, we were both very conservative in the number, because I have talked to a U.S. Army sergeant who has been involved in retrieving crashes of flying objects of various sorts. And I think he has a manual, he told me, where the U.S. Army describes 54 different species. And so they're aware of that number, and actually, I'm sure there are many, many, probably thousands more. Now, each time a U.S. president is elected, he is briefed and told a little bit about UFOs and the extraterrestrial presence and the extent to which the Americans are in contact with them. And he is told that they are benign with the exception of one. And that one is, of course, the one that is likely to have and continue to make the most problem. One more thing on this subject before leaving it, and that is that there was a Venusian by the name of Valiant Thor who flew to Earth and actually lived in the Pentagon for 3 or 4 years and worked with the officials in the Pentagon. And he volunteered to give us the good life, to give us their very advanced capability of curing illness and of growing food and all of these things that where they are so much further ahead than we are. And he was a beautiful man, an IQ of 1200, just the sort of a chap you would want your daughter to bring home for dinner if she were dating. This, of course, is not how they all look, because the short grays, for example, and you've probably seen pictures of those, are short with very large eyes and very long and slender legs and arms. So that there is a variety, and they come from all over, and they look different, and many have different objectives. But we have can only hope that we someday, I didn't tell you what Valiant Thor had offered us. I told you what he had offered us, but I didn't say that the price was that we give up our atomic weapons, because the atomic weapons have an effect all over the universe, all over the cosmos, as a matter of fact, because it's a unity. And they want us to get rid of these atomic weapons before we blow ourselves up and before we make the planet uninhabitable for humans. So one of the biggest mistakes, I guess, that was ever made, and it was not the politicians, it was the military who decided that we would not accept that offer, and I would say it was one of the biggest mistakes that we Earthlings have ever made, and sometime we're going to have to try and rectify it. The second issue, although it is not the most important in the long run, is a massive change in our monetary and banking system. We have a banking system now which is so insane that I can't describe it in words. But we have handed over the right to create our money to private individuals and corporations. And they create it out of nothing, out of thin air, and then lend it back to us and charge interest on it. And this system, which I am greatly reducing here because it is explained in length in the book, has resulted in some very, very sad results. There are people in the world today who have trillions and trillions of dollars in wealth, and there are millions who are starving. 62 families actually have more wealth than all of the other people in the world put together. Isn't that incredible? And it's because we have defaulted. We have said, you can create our money. It's our money. We own the patent, and we should be creating some of it for ourselves, but we've listened to your pleas, and we have given you this monopoly, and it has cost us trillions and abject poverty for millions of people who don't even have enough to buy their bread. So want to change the system very, very dramatically. And some colleagues and I have made a proposal, which you can read about in the book, of reintroducing what they call cash reserves. And that is that unlike the present time when banks have no cash in their vaults, none at all, and whether what they're lending you is not money because they don't have any to lend, they're just lending you their credit, we're going to change that back to an earlier day when at least they had to have cash reserves of a certain amount, and this will be done over a period of 7 years, which will allow governments to create a tremendous amount of money to recover from the virus epidemic. The situation at the moment is bleak. People are in real trouble. They haven't enough money for rent. They don't know what to do. And governments are floundering. They don't know what to do either. But the answer is in the book. It is to change the system and to start having the government itself, through their central banks, create a very lot of money which will get the economy up and running. So much, in fact, that if you take the whole world, the amount of money that would be created by governments per year for 7 years would be about $6 trillion. And that would be a huge boost to the world economy and get it up and running. Even more important, it would reduce the power of the banking cartel, which at the present time is overwhelming. They're really running the world. They're telling us what to do. They're deciding our fate. And we're going to end that system, and we're going to end it now. We have to. So a lot of things have to be done. The most important is that the United States is going to have to nationalize the Fed, which was, as I say in several books, the biggest heist in history, costing the American people untold trillions of dollars in interest. They have to take back the Fed, nationalize it, and use it for their own benefit, and in order to create this money that I've been talking about that is necessary to rebuild the economy and to rebuild the infrastructure and to do the things that have been overcome and have been bypassed for the last long while because there hasn't been enough money to do it. So most of you, I don't think, are aware that money is nothing but air. The head of the First Bank of Canada, Governor Graham Towers, said money is just a book entry. That's all it is. If he were alive today, he'd say all it is a computer entry. But it depends who owns the computer, the bank or the people. And I think there could be no greater contribution to the future of the world at the present time than for the United States to lead the way in taking over, I say confiscated in my book, the Fed, and leading the world in government-created money and doing the things that are good for the ordinary people and not just for the billionaires and multi-billionaires and multi-trillionaires. One final note on this. When I looked at the situation closely, I saw that there are ways that are being adopted to look after the billionaires and some of the middle class, but the poor were absolutely, totally neglected. And it took me a long while to come to this conclusion, but I have finally come to it. We are going to have to adopt a minimum wage for all the people, a minimum living wage paid to them without any connection to their employment. And I'm sure you'll say, well, some of them are going to cheat. And they're absolutely right. There are going to be some artists and some others, but they're not going to cheat as much as the billionaires who park their money offshore in order not to have to pay taxes to support the legitimate needs of their fellow citizens. So I've thought about this hard and long, and I do it reluctantly, but there is no other way that I can think of that we can stop the poor from falling through the tracks and being left destitute and ruining their families and ruining their hopes and really being out on their luck than to have an income that they can count on that is enough at least to put some kind of a roof over their head and food on the table. So the time has come to take this monumental step in every country in the world so that we eliminate poverty, and so the distribution of wealth changes dramatically from the richest families in the world getting the big lion's share and leaving some for the people of the world who need it most. Now, I wish I could elaborate more on this because it's my favorite subject going back my whole political career. But you can read all about it, and I recommend it highly. You'll learn a lot about money, but most important, you'll learn that we don't have to live in poverty. We don't have to be slaves to debt. And that is the reason for the title of the book, Liberated, Freed from Being Debt Slaves. And it can be done, it must be done, and it must be done now, not later. The third issue is by far the most important because the lives of millions of us are involved. In a word, you can call it the Fourth Reich. Until a few years ago, I thought that the Allies had won World War II. I found out to my dismay that that was not the case. The Germans had just surrendered and gone underground and have been working ever since. A lot of them were taken into the United States after the war voluntarily to serve against the Cold War with Russia. The United States brought scientists of all kinds and didn't want them to fall into anybody else's hands, so they recruited them and brought them to the United States and gave them new names, new CVs, and then citizenship and appointments to very important jobs in the military and civil life of the country. The operation was called Operation Paperclip, and you can look at it, Wikipedia, where it's described in some detail. President Truman had approved it after a while on the basis that none of the people brought in were involved in the Nazi Party, but obviously that just can't apply when you're bringing in the best scientists and engineers and medical doctors and others. And so many of them were brought in, and it wasn't long before they wielded very considerable power. There was another operation called Operation High Jump, and that was that the Germans had been working to build a base in Antarctica. And I was always of the opinion that they just started that near the end of the war when they knew they were going to lose. And they took many of their best scientists and engineers to Antarctica to set up what they called the New Berlin. Now I found that they were working on it all the way through World War II, and with the help of one species that is the one that we are most concerned about. And the Americans found out about the base in Antarctica, and the Secretary of Defense sent an armada to go and wipe it out. They refueled on the way down and got there and thought it would be an easy task to take over the base. A couple of flying saucers came up from the ocean, sank one of their ships, killed some of their men, and they had to go home without anything to show for it except defeat. Admiral Byrd was absolutely livid, and he wanted to nuke them. But by the time he got home, the Nazis had so much power in the American military that nothing was ever done. They moved the back engineering of the aircraft that crashed at Roswell to the western part of the United States, which would be again away from the spying eyes of the government and the press, and they called them special operations. They have been working in those areas ever since and have built a space fleet of formidable proportions. So much so that even though the United States has not yet formally admitted the existence of UFOs, they have built a fleet of them, and they have more power than any military force in the history, or recent history, I should say, of the planet. And what they plan to do, of course, is to build what they called a New World Order. And this was announced by President George Bush Sr., and it sounded like a great idea that we're going to have a world government, and everybody was going to be happy, everybody was going to have enough to eat, and enough of everything. But that isn't what they meant. What they meant was an unelected government of the elite, by the elite, for the elite, and it was going to be a fascist government, and it was going to be part of the Fourth Reich. This same group, which have been in charge of the United States ever since, well, they are so much in charge, in fact, that when they moved their operations to the West, President Eisenhower was livid because they wouldn't tell them what he was doing. So he threatened to send into the army, and they let him send in 4 people to take a look, and that's what they were doing, is back engineering the spaceship and going forward with their plans for a space force and armada. They have, as part of their plan, in concert with their ally, decided to reduce the population of planet Earth dramatically. How much, no one seems to know for sure, but it is a public policy in the United States to reduce the population. The head of one broadcasting system said maybe the Earth could accommodate 500 million people. But what about the rest? And I can tell you that the Creator does not want a few thousand white supremacists to decide which of the billions of people in the world are going to die and which are not. That is not their call, and they mustn't be allowed to exercise it. What do you do about it? Well, there's nothing that can be done about it in the military sphere, because they have the military power, and it's unlike anything that has happened before. So the only way to do anything about it is to persuade millions of Americans to demand the defunding of the U.S. Armed Forces. And in my book, and now I plea for 50% reduction, immediate reduction in their budget. That's incidentally the amount that it was increased at the time of the false flag operation in New York City. So reducing it 50%, and not only reducing it 50%, but directing the reductions so that it goes directly to those organizations in the military and in the intelligence, because it is partly an intelligence operation, and put the ones out of business or out of business temporarily until they can find out who is on the side of the Republic, who is faithful to the people of the United States, and who is not. But look at it through the eyes of the Nazis temporarily. They are angry with America for going into the war with the Allies. They are angry with the Russians for going into the war with the Allies, switching horses in midstream. And they want to take it out on them. So they have a reason to try and do maximum damage in retribution for what was done, even though after the war we helped them reestablish their industrial base and help pay for it. So that is the situation at the moment, and the timing, no one knows, but it's more imminent than one might think. And the way to stop it is defunding. Only the Congress, with the aid of the President, can do it. Nobody else can. Military can't do it. No law will do it. No military force that exists on Earth can do it. Only the people, by taking away the one thing that is the fuel for any operation, including a military operation, and that is money, M-O-N-E-Y. When they do that, they can sort the whole thing out. They can require new oaths of office for people who are given back positions in the military and the civil parts of the country that have been corrupted totally. One I say that should be disbanded immediately is the CIA. Allen Dulles, when he was head of the CIA, had sympathy for the Nazis, and he and his brother allowed more hundreds or thousands of Nazis to come into the United States and take over the CIA totally. And it's been working on behalf of what I call the Cabal, which is defined in my book, and which is roughly, quickly, the Bavarian Illuminati, the Three Sisters, the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, which was working on its own empire, and the Trilateral Commission, and then the part of the apex is the money cartel, the banking cartel, and then the oil cartel, and then the transnational corporations, and then the intelligence organizations, the FBI, the CIA, would you believe, the MI6 in Britain, and the Israeli Mossad, all working together to bring about this nightmare for the world. And we have to do something now, and we have to do it quickly. And my appeal is that you take this teaser that I've sent out and send it to everybody you know, and ask them to send it on to everybody they know. Because the lives of everyone that they'll send it to, in addition to their own, is really at stake. So I hope and pray that we will do what is right for the people of the world and in the fight for the light against the dark, which is really what we're up against. Thank you.